Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name's Leora and I talk on here about books, writing and sometimes other stuff as well. And today I am doing my May wrap up. Listen, I actually don't really know what happened exactly in May, as I read 22 books in total. It's like a worrying amount of books. It's like a little bit concerning. It's like, does she actually live in the real world? And the answer is no, I don't. I just, no, sorry. And I've actually dreaded filming this wrap up just because I knew it was going to be so long and I was going to have like so many books to talk about. So a little disclaimer, some of them are poetry, some of them are shorter, some of them are longer. I read for work as well. This is partially my work, so that's also how I get to read as much as I do. Not that this is like a regular amount for me, it's not at all. Usually I read between like 4 to maybe 10 books at most a month. So this is definitely special. I guess I just had a really good reading month, and I do have some mental health issues and it works really well for me to read to calm down, so I guess that is how it happened. So I guess we do know a little bit how it happened, just a little bit. And I also want to say that you're a reader no matter how many books you read. If you enjoy reading, you're a reader. And you're welcome here. Okay, so now let's finally really get into all of the books I read in May. So I started May with one of the novels of one of my favourite romance authors, which is Alexandria Bellafleur. She writes wonderful romance, and I was reading Count Your Lucky Stars, which is part 3 in the Written in the Stars trilogy, I guess. I don't think there's going to be any more, but I don't know actually, so there might be. So in the first book we follow Elle and Darcy and their love story, and then in the second book we follow Brandon and Annie, and then in the third book we have Margot and Olivia. So this is a sapphic romance. It was so good. It was so romantic. I had a really good time reading with Margot's character as a POV because we do get to see some of Margot in the previous books, but we never get to learn like a whole lot about her. So I was really excited about getting to know her better as a character. It's just a very sweet queer romance. There's a lot of funny jokes in these books. I think all of them in the whole series are very witty and just like lots of banter, lots of good dynamics between characters. And I feel like also the romance and like the tension, the chemistry is always really good between Alexandria's characters. So I really enjoyed that. I think out of the 3, this one is not my favourite, but it's a close one. I liked it better than the second one, but not better than the first one. So I guess that's my review. I had a good time reading it though. I think I gave it 4 stars or something like that. Then in the midst of the whole abortion discussion, I decided to read this fun, light feminist fiction, which is called Men, I Hate Them. And this is by Pauline Harmange. This is an essay that she wrote all about how hating men can help us further as a society. Yay! I think the biggest point of this entire essay is just that telling women they hate men when they speak up for themselves is not productive, which is obviously. I felt like there were some points in here that I agreed with, but I do feel like in the end, as people, we should come together to solve issues. And yes, I do think men should speak up more when it comes to feminist issues. That doesn't mean that I feel like we should hate men. I am a girl that makes jokes about hating men, and that is something that Pauline also gets to in this book, is that is different from men hating women because of the whole power dynamic. So I understand some of the points she makes in this, but I just don't really agree, and I also feel like she didn't really offer like a solution how to use hating men actually in a productive and good way. So I don't know if I agree, but it was definitely a very interesting piece of fiction to read, and I also had a really good time like reading this outside and people like giving me funny looks, so I don't know, I guess I just thought that was funny. Then the next book I picked up was Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is also a sort of romance but also an alternative ending story, so I'll explain that briefly. Taylor Jenkins Reid is one of my favourite authors of all time. I just love everything she writes. It's all so romantic and it tugs at the heartstrings, and just her fiction makes me really happy. So I've loved Malibu Rising. Daisy Jones and the Six wasn't the biggest fan, but then The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was one of my favourite books of all time. I've been a big Taylor Jenkins Reid fan, but I haven't read a lot of her backlist, so I decided to go back and pick this one up. And it's basically about Hannah, who moves back to her best friend's town, where she's also from, to sort of start over in life, because she's kind of messing around and she's not sure what she's doing. And then when she gets there, she runs into a guy that's like sort of the one that got away. So she thinks she should give it another go with him, like the relationship. And then you basically read like 2 different scenarios from that point on out. One scenario in which she stays with him at the bar, and one scenario in which she goes home with her friends, and both scenarios have such different outcomes and different characters and different storylines. But it was so interesting, and this story really tried to tell you something about how making choices influences your life, but also how certain things will happen anyway, and is there such a thing as fate or not. And it was very interesting. I do feel like the book really started repeating itself at the end, because like Taylor Jenkins Reid really wrote down the conclusion of this book quite literally. Like, you didn't grasp it from what she was telling. No, she wrote it down literally, like what her thoughts and like what the conclusion should be of this story, the lesson. I didn't like that a whole lot. I thought it was very obvious, and it was like, I know, you should have just let me deduce that from the story. And also because it's 2 separate storylines, she did it like 2 times, and I was like, obviously I got it from the first time. So wasn't my favorite thing. I did like the overall story though. It was a fun read, but it wasn't as special to me as some of her other books. Then after this, I read Woman Eating by Claire Coder, which is such a messed up book. It's like one of the weirdest things I've read in recent years. So this is about Lydia, who's a vampire, and her mother has been put into a care home because she wasn't doing so well. Lydia basically wants nothing to do with her mother. She's like over the whole thing with her mother, basically. She's like, I don't want to care for her anymore. She has a really difficult relationship with her mother. And then she moves into this art studio to try and build a life for herself, but it's quite difficult being a vampire in modern society. She struggles with men as well. There are lots of horrible men in her life, but also one potentially nice man, but he has a girlfriend, and she has like this thirst for blood, and there's loads of things going on. This book is all over the place. It's absolutely wild. Why is the sun coming through right now to ruin this video? Anyway, I liked this. It wasn't my favorite thing ever though. It was definitely funny and entertaining, so I would recommend it. Then I picked up a Dutch book. This is Zeik niet zo, het echte leven van de Millennial. And this is by Anouk Kemper, Lianne Marie Sanders, and Suzette Hermsen. I got this from the library. This is basically an essay collection by 3 Dutch writers. And I think they were all like in their 20s when they wrote this. And it's basically about being in your 20s, falling in love. It's all sorts of different essays by them. I liked it. I was kind of hoping it would be like the Dutch version of Dolly Alderton. I didn't like it that much. Sometimes I really didn't like the language they used. They would use like text language, like the way you text each other. And just felt like that was kind of too bad. And also it was so many little like essays and bits and bobs, and it was kind of, I felt like it didn't really have a lot of structure. So I think I gave it 2 stars or something. And there were also some remarks in here about dieting and stuff and other things that just didn't really sit right with me. Although the discussion on eating disorders inside this was definitely interesting. It was kind of a mixed bag for me. And then I read one of my favorite books that I picked up this month actually, and you can see this also by the amount of tabs inside this book. This is Somebody's Daughter by Ashley Seaford. This is a memoir of Ashley's life growing up and sort of having a troubled relationship with her family and her father who was in prison, but it's also really about being a child, seeing the wonders of the world, growing up, realizing that everybody around you is flawed, but it's also about loving life and being in the moment. And I'm sounding so generic right now, but just trust me when I say that this book is so good. It's funny, it's incredibly sad, it's a little bit heartbreaking, but it's really beautiful and has beautiful prose as well. I think I can read some of my favorite sentences actually, because I did a really good job tabbing. So one of my favorite sentences that really drew me into the book when I started reading it was this one. When I was 4 years old, I taught myself to lie awake until morning. I wanted the sunrise, and I only had to stay awake to have her. When children are small, our desires seem small, even if we want the sky. Anything we want seems to be only a matter of time and effort away. It's too early to imagine what's already holding you back. Oh my god! And the whole book is just filled with quotes like this. It's really, really beautiful. At some point she says, out here in this world, I felt myself being dragged down a path toward adulthood, but I wasn't done swinging on the playground. Oh my god, same. I felt like that so much growing up. So this was just beautiful. Absolutely adored it. Would highly recommend. Then I had another poetry moment and I read Whale Day by Billy Collins. I listened to this in audiobook and then immediately went out to buy the physical copy so I could read that as well. Billy Collins is one of my new favourite poets, and I have to thank my writing teacher for this because she put me onto this. His writing is just funny, it's lyrical, it's incredibly beautiful. But it's so, like, it's a little bit silly. I like that this is like sort of positive poetry. There's also some sad poems in there, and it's definitely not all like frolicking through the fields being so happy, but it's like not so harsh and incredibly sad the whole time. Like I feel like a lot of serious poetry is. So I really enjoyed this. One of my favourite poems about Paris is in here. and it's just the atmosphere in that, so good. If you want to read some poetry, pick up Billy Collins, please. Then I read a dark academia read that totally grabbed me and wouldn't let me go before I finished it. I think I read this in like 4 days. I was so into this and I just couldn't stop reading it, which is The Grim Rose Girls by Leora. So this is about Ella, Yuki, Rory, and Ariana. And Ariana has died in a mysterious way. And basically the 4 girls are the talk of their school, and they're like in this elite academy in the forest near a lake, and it's all very atmospheric. And then a new girl arrives at the school called Nani, and they basically form this little group again, and they start to find out what happened to their friend. It's a very classic dark academia plot, but fairy tales are a big theme in this story, and if you like dark and grim twisted fairy tales, I would highly recommend this. There's a lot of murder, there's a lot of horrible scenes, and it's quite graphic, I think, especially for YA. There's also lots of queer characters in here. There's romance, there's queer romance, it's sapphic. It's just, oh my god, one of my favorite things. Very happy that I've read this. The publisher also came to me and asked me if I wanted to get an arc for the sequel, and I was like, yes, obviously. So really excited. Also, if you're just like me, really into secret hallways and like secret passages in castles and big mansions, then pick this up. Yes, and there's also lots of secret late at night magic meetings in libraries and stuff like that, and it's just, it is all the vibes. It's everything you want. Yes. Then after reading that, I felt like reading some non-fiction again, so I picked up Find the Good, Unexpected Life Lessons from a Small Town Obituary Writer by Heather Lender. I already briefly mentioned this read in one of my previous videos. This is basically a collection of short essays and stories and just basically little texts that Heather Lender wrote about her life as an obituary writer. It's a very heart-wrenching read. It's like so sad because Heather gets to talk to all these people that have loved ones that have died, and it's kind of tragic to be talking to those people who've just lost something, but she's got to write something beautiful about that, and she's got to sort of summarize somebody's whole life and their most important relationships and happenings in their life. It is something that stays with you. I found myself thinking about some of the stories in this one like days afterwards, and I just thought it was absolutely beautiful, even though it's definitely heartbreaking, but it's also hopeful and like positive and like uplifting. It's a whole lot of things, but I do recommend it. I really liked it, and the audiobook was also really nice to listen to. And then afterwards I picked up the Bridesmaids Survival Guides by Hannah O'Donnell. Guys, isn't this just like the most beautiful cover you've ever seen in your entire life? It is so stunning. Did you know that I actually designed this cover? I'm still so proud and so excited about this. So as some of you may know, if you've been watching me for a longer time, I'm also an illustrator and a designer, and I got to design this cover for this book, and it looks really good and I'm really excited about it. Publishers, writers, please hire me. I would love to design your book cover. So yes, I really wanted to read this in one of the spring months because it's a very spring-esque read. So when I illustrated the cover, I already got to read some of the chapters beforehand. So this story is about Rêverie, and she's always been really close to her Aunt Em, and Aunt Em is getting married. She's always had a more difficult and more strained relationship with her mother because of her weight, but also because of just, between the two of them, it's just not as well flowing as between her and Aunt Em. And then her boyfriend dumps her a few weeks before the wedding, and everything just goes absolutely wrong. And then as she starts to get ready for the wedding, some new things happens and a little romance unfurls. This was really cute and sweet. There were a few things about this book that I didn't really understand. Like, for example, Rêverie gives everybody in her life like a different name than what they actually are called, and that is sort of like a funny gimmick throughout the entire book. But I was like, so is it supposed to be like this is her, like actually her writing the book, and then that is why she's giving everybody like a different name because she doesn't want to expose them? But like that wasn't really clarified, or at least I didn't really remember it. And then I was like, what is the use of this, and why aren't these people just called what they're called? And like I didn't really understand it. Also, some of the choices being made by Rêverie in this book are just like I did not understand them. She's at a party, she goes upstairs to do makeup, and then she takes off her shirt and her bra inside somebody else's room at a party to do makeup so they don't get dirty. That just seems like a plot device, because who actually does that? So that was just a little bit weird to me. I was like, why? Choices were made by Rêverie and they were not the right choices. I'm sorry. Other than that, I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was funny, it was cute, it was sweet. I had a good time reading it. And I think Hannah, as an author, definitely has a way with words, and just some of the prose is absolutely beautiful, super witty, very funny, and also a good time to read about a plus-size protagonist. So yes, Hannah, I know you're my friend. I'm sorry. There were just some things I didn't get about this book, but I'm still really happy I read it, and I'm really happy I got to design the cover. Thank you. After I finished the Bridesmaids guide, I picked up The Apple That Astonished Paris by Billy Collins. yes, I was like, why not read another Billy Collins book? Let's do it. I really love this. Apparently this is one of his first collections, like one of the first ones that got published. Poems in here about books and about reading, which is so atmospheric, absolutely beautiful, very funny as well. It was just really good. And this cover is also absolutely stunning. So yes, highly recommend. I really liked it. Then the next book I read is Amateur, A True Story About What Makes a Man by Thomas Page McBee. This story is about a trans man who, as a journalist, learns to box to write an article about boxing and about masculinity and what it means to be a man. And so the protagonist is transgender, and the author of this book, Thomas Page McBee, is also trans. I thought this was such an incredible read, and I think so many more people should read it. It's definitely a sports book because boxing and sports are a really big theme in this book, and there's lots of passages about him boxing, but it's also about masculinity, gender, what our society thinks of gender, what makes you a man, what makes you a woman. It's about personal relationships, it's about going through a transition, it's about society as a whole and our gender norms and gender roles, and it was absolutely incredible. I didn't expect to adore this book so much. And some of the passages that Thomas Page McBee writes about the main character's girlfriend and their romance and sort of their intimacy together and them living in their little flat, it's just so beautiful. Just the prose was stunning and the vibes just really came through. I really adore this book and I would highly recommend it, and yeah, it was really good. Then I read Magnolia by Nina Minya Powles. So it's a poetry collection and it's about identity and being half Chinese, and it's about China as well, and Shanghai is a really big part of this poetry collection. And I thought that was beautiful. I thought it was very atmospheric. Again, that's my favorite word, apparently. So language is a big theme in this book, and I thought some of the experiments in here with language were very exciting and very interesting, but personally they just weren't my thing, and I felt like she was just trying different poetry styles and trying out different things. I felt like maybe some of the poems just weren't quite ready, actually. I didn't understand a lot of it. A lot of it just felt like words being thrown on a page. But what I did like, the incorporation of Chinese language and her adoration for Shanghai also really shined through in this book. So yeah, there were some things I liked, some things I didn't like as much, and yeah, overall it wasn't my thing. And then I also read The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This was a hit. I absolutely had such a good time reading this, way better than I expected. I also flew through this book. So this is about Avery Grams, who inherits more than $1 billion. I think $4 billion? $46.2 billion. A lot of dollars. From a man she's never met before who died. And then she basically has to go to this mansion for the reading of the will, and all the grandsons and daughters are extremely upset that their father and grandfather gave this money away to a girl they don't even know. And then sort of a game starts of them all trying to discover why is she getting the money, and it's set in an old mansion. There's romance, there's tension, there's a lot of handsome brothers. And yeah, I had a really good time reading this, and if you want to know more about some of my in-depth thoughts about this, you can check out my reading vlog as well. Really enjoyed it. It was a good time. Another read I finished this month was This Book Is Gay by Juno Dawson. This was also I had a good time reading it. It was fun, but also I feel like it could have been better. So this is basically a sort of manual on how to be gay, and it talks all about coming out. It's sort of sex education as well. It talks about different sexualities. I liked it. It was funny. It was sort of a funny non-fiction read with some illustrations as well, but it wasn't super inclusive. I think asexuality is only mentioned once or twice, and it's also really focused on gay men and not so much on sapphic women or transgender people. I know that the author is actually transgender and that they've written another book in this series about being trans and about gender, so I think maybe that one sort of fills this one in, but I don't own that, and I can't speak on that. So this book on its own didn't really work for me, but I did have a fun time reading it. So then after this I read one of my favourite graphic novels, which is The Tea Dragon Festival by Kay O'Neill. This was so good. So this is the second Tea Dragon Society graphic novel. I think I have the first one somewhere around here. Yes, so this is the first one. I don't own the second one physically, although I really should get it because these are just so heartwarming and so cute. The second one is called The Tea Dragon Festival, and these are basically graphic novels with the cutest art style you've ever laid your eyes upon. It is so incredibly cute. It's basically about these cute dragons that grow tea leaves, and then you can brew tea from that, and it's like all these cute people living together. The second book was about a festival and about a dragon that had fell asleep for a really long time and then returned to the village for his duties and like getting back into society, making new friends, new family. It was like found family in the countryside, lots of sunshine. It was such a good time. If you want to feel good, then read this. And I read the third novel in the Cassidy Blake series by Victoria Schwab, which is Bridge of Souls. I've read the first two of these as well. These are very spooky middle grade novels about a girl who can see ghosts, and her parents are ghost hunters but don't really believe in ghosts. Like, they don't know that their daughter can see ghosts and that they're putting her in all these horrible situations because she always gets to be in environments where there are lots of ghosts because her parents are ghost hunters for a TV show. So her parents don't actually think she can see ghosts. They don't know. There's a fun irony in that, and these books are just very funny. Cassidy also has a ghost best friend, and he's a modern ghost, which is really cool as well. He's like into video games and comics. So I really like these, and I think this was not my favorite out of the three. I think the first one is my favorite, although the one set in Paris is also really good. I enjoyed it, had a good time reading it. Then another book I read this month is I Feel Bad About My Neck by Nora Ephron, our rom-com queen. So yes, Nora Ephron has written a lot of rom-com movies, but also some books, and I read this because Dolly Alderton said that Nora Ephron is one of her favourite authors, and Dolly Alderton is one of my favourite authors, so that is why I picked this up. And it's basically some essays that Nora Ephron has written. This was a little bit shallow at certain points. Like, some things that Nora Ephron says I was just like, yeah, but there's more important things in life, right? Because this book definitely talks a lot about surface things, but then at the same time, it was really funny. Even though it's a very specific, like, sort of POV, like, Nora Ephron is really focused on her bit of the world and her worldview. I still had a really good time reading this. I thought it was hilarious. I laughed out loud several times. Nora Ephron is so sassy and just, like, very funny. For example, some of the quotes on the back are, "Never marry a man you wouldn't want to be divorced from. If the shoe doesn't fit in the shoe store, it's never going to fit." I liked it. Then, this is a fantasy read I read throughout the month. This is Master of Jinn by P. Djeli Clark. As some of you may know, I've been absolutely raving about P. Djeli Clark since 2020. I've read some of his short novellas, and when I found out there was going to be a full-length fantasy novel about his magical Cairo world, I knew I had to read it. So this is set in an alternative magical version of Cairo in Egypt, and it's basically about Fatma, and she's the youngest woman working for the Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantments and Supernatural Entities, and we read all about her doing this sort of murder investigation together with her new partner, and there's also lots of jinn and magical creatures in this book. I had a really good time reading it. I think P. Djeli Clark is absolutely hilarious. He's so funny. He writes in such a witty way. This was just really good. It did drag on a little bit in the middle, so I got a little bit bored and I put it down, but then I picked it back up later. The whole sort of magical enchantments ministry is really interesting. Fatma is such a great and fierce character, and I also think her partner that she gets in this book, who's called Hadia, is really, really good and really great. Such a fun person to read about. I felt like Fatma was a little bit dumb sometimes though, like some of the things she did, and sometimes certain things would take her so long to figure out. So I wasn't sure if that was intentional or that was just me, but yeah, and I'm really happy I discovered P. Djeli Clark's fantasy writing. And then I also read The Royal Art of Poison, Filthy Palaces, Fatal Cosmetics, Deadly Medicine, and Murder Most Foul by Eleanor Harriman. I was obsessed with this book whilst reading it. It's absolutely gross. It's one of the grossest books, is that a word? It's one of the most filthy, gross books I've ever read. It's like puke worthy. If you have a weak stomach, I really do not recommend this book. I'm actually telling you to stray away from it, to steer clear from it, to like walk around it in a big bow, because it's so gross. So it's basically all about poison, but also a lot of historical deaths which might have been poison, but might have also just been murder, or not poison at all, or just a natural cause. So I think people who like true crime could also be interested in this book, but also people who love history and like funny facts about history. This is just such a funny non-fiction read about poison. I learned a lot about poison, but also a lot about like silly figures from history and idiotic things that they did. Like, for example, I read about a mathematician who got into a fight, like a sword fight, about a mathematical equation. Like stuff like that, and also stories about mass graves and sort of poison and how it works in the body, and like that people thought that unicorn horns, which were actually narwhal horns, could protect them from poison, stuff like that. Lots of things happening in this book. It was really good, it was really funny, and the audiobook is also really great. So I highly recommend that one as well. Then another book I read this month is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This was so good! Oh my god, I want to scream, and I might scream because this was one of my favorite books I read this month. I read a lot of good books actually. This is my new favorite romance. It was so good. I tapped the whole thing basically. So this is about Nora, who's a literary agent. She's very focused on work, but she's also always been very close to her sister, Libby. Basically, they go on a trip together to Sunshine Falls, which is the town that one of Nora's most successful published books is set in. And yeah, there she meets Charlie. She's seen him before. They're like sort of work nemesis. And he is an editor. It's enemies to lovers. It's really good. The sisterly bond and sort of the discussions on family and sisters and grief are really good in this book. If you're looking for a romance with two super snarky main characters who are like at each other's throats but also have so much tension, I want to throw this book at your face. It is so good. I had the best time reading this. The smut is also... They have in a library at some point. I highly recommend. If you're into like books about books, this is also a really good one. So I had a great time. And then last but not least, in this huge wrap up that took way too long to film and is gonna be an absolute chore to edit, I read The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince by Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb is one of my favourite fantasy authors. I was really interested to read one of her, not if her only, relatively short book. So this is basically a legend that is mentioned in one of her other fantasy books, Caution Farseer, and how her heir came on the throne and how everything happened in the court back then. It's a story about motherhood, but it's also a story about being friends. There's a sapphic relationship in this, which I did not know going in. It was a really short read, but nonetheless it worked really well like as a short fantasy read. But it works especially well if you've read some other Robin Hobb, especially the Farseer stories. So yeah, I like this. It was really good. And I also love this special edition that I found at the thrift store. And I can't believe I forgot to mention it, but this book is also sapphic and has a sapphic relationship in there. So yes, that was everything I read in May. Oh my god, I can't believe I got through the whole thing. So those were all the books I read. I had a really good reading month. I hope you guys had that as well. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and give it a thumbs up if you like this video. Let me know in the comments down below what you've been reading and whether you enjoyed this video. And yeah, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching my channel and subscribing and being here. It makes me really happy. And yeah, I hope you have the best day. Bye guys!